So the remake of The Lion King has been out in the box office for almost 2 weeks now, and it has pretty much made $1 billion. Yeah, that's already more money than the original movie made in its entire theatrical run. Disney is definitely taking over the box office with these live-action things, taking away business from other great movies such as Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Midsummer, The Farewell, and it's really scaring me because there are a lot of great filmmakers out there who would love to tell their stories and to get their creative talents out there and to hopefully make enough money on their projects to continue making more. But people aren't seeing them. You want to know why? Because these movies keep coming out. Now look, I don't hate Disney by any means. Like, they release good films, and I think in terms of the content that they produce, I still feel that they push for family values and at least hope that people will take something out of their stories that encourage them to be better people. However, their business practices tend to be pretty scummy. I haven't liked most of the live-action remakes that Disney has produced so far, and I don't particularly care for this adaptation as well. Now, I hesitate to even call this movie a remake because people aren't really doing anything creative with the story. The original team of Final Fantasy VII going back and changing the game to look more like this is a remake. The Coen brothers taking the original 1969 True Grit and making it into something new and fresh is a remake. Disney copying and pasting the same storyboarding, screenplay for the most part, and music and transforming it into a new art style is not a remake. It is a soulless, creatively inept adaptation that should never have existed. Now look, I hope you understand something. I am a huge fan of the original movie. I think it's probably the best film that Disney Animation Studios has ever made, and even though it's certainly not perfect, but when I rewatched it a couple weeks ago, there were so many great elements to it that made it special, and despite the simple and very short story, it works, and there's nothing really about it that feels cringy, nothing that doesn't hold up. It all works, and it's fun, entertaining, and has a deep message that even adults can take from as much as a kid could. In the translation to a more realistic, live-action-ish style of animation, though, a lot of what made the original movie so great has been lost in translation. And since there certainly haven't been a shortage of videos about the Lion King remake here on YouTube so far, I am going to add my own opinion on why I think this is a horrible piece of garbage. I wish to give 2 caveats here. For those who do like this movie, that's fine. Me saying my opinion isn't supposed to sway you into thinking something else. Like, if you appreciated this movie, then that was your experience. You can hold that to yourself, and you shouldn't let what I say or anyone else say make you change your mind about it. But that being said, I want to express my opinion and how I feel about this because this is a trend that isn't doing Disney fans any favors. And also I wanted to talk specifically about why the style that they selected for this particular version of The Lion King does not work at all, and I think is a horribly misguided choice for Disney to make. Now let's take a look at why the original Lion King was so great. In that film, you have a story that's heavily inspired by traditional tales from the Bible, Shakespeare's Hamlet, and then this thing as well, arguably. But it's very simple, tight, and meaningful. You have the story of Simba, who is the son of the king of the Pride Lands in Africa, and when Simba's uncle Scar usurps the throne by murdering his father Mufasa, the whole story goes from there, in which Simba has to learn to eventually assume his place and try to actually become who he was always meant to be. Like I said, it's a very simple narrative, but one that works because there's so much meaning and depth and subtleties to all the messages that are being portrayed, and all the aspects of what make animation so great and so fun to enjoy were there to boost the story and make it even more meaningful than just how it would look on paper. What I've always loved about animation is that it pretty much allows filmmakers to do anything that they want because they can create any sort of image or character that wouldn't exist in real life and transform it into something that we can appreciate on the screen and relate to and be able to enjoy their experience with. In particular with animals, it's amazing how animation allows us to tell stories from their perspectives and to project ourselves onto these characters because in real life, animals can't emote in the same way that we can. They certainly can't think or express themselves in the ways that humans can. And so for us to be able to see a more human story told from the perspective of animals is interesting, and it definitely changes things up. With The Lion King in particular, it adopts a very specific animation style in which the animal characters aren't anthropomorphized like they were in like Robin Hood, The Great Mouse Detective, or Zootopia. They still moved and acted like animals, and their specific animal traits were still there, yet they still had the ability to express themselves and emote like the way that humans could. That made the story unique in the sense that we were still watching animals interact with each other in the way that you would expect them to in real life, but nonetheless, they're exaggerated to the point to where we can enjoy them, and it's not so weird to see them interact because of the art style and the beautiful animation that's on display. What the remake does, though, is that it completely alters the art style that was there in the first movie and changes it into something more realistic, and as some people have compared it to, akin to like a Planet Earth documentary or something. Because of that, all the character designs mirror pretty much exactly what the real animals would look like, and also act and move like too. They have also chosen to have the animals express themselves in the way that their actual animal counterparts would. The only caveat is they move their mouths when they're speaking. With that, you already have one crucial aspect of animation that has been robbed from this film's quality. None of the animal characters in the Lion King remake can actually emote in the same way that the dialogue and the actors are trying to express themselves in. A key example of this is a hilariously bad interpretation of the scene where Mufasa dies and Simba reacts. As Mufasa is flung to his death by Scar and he's starting to fall towards the stampede of wildebeests, it does that cut that we're all familiar with, going to Simba's reaction shot and the camera zooms out. But what happens is, Simba doesn't have this look of absolute terror and fear that's on his face when he sees his father fall to his death. Instead, it looks more like just a cat meowing. And for me, I had two reactions. Aw, that's cute. And two, what the heck am I watching? Any sort of emotion that could have been there was completely removed from the film, and it almost became laughable. If there was no one else in the theater that I saw this in, I would have burst out laughing because of how horribly executed it was. And that goes for pretty much every single scene of this movie. In scenes where you would expect there to be some more anger, frustration, humor, happiness, joy, laughter, anything you can think of that a human can express is completely gone. Because in the original movie, what you have with the characters is both a blend of what the artists are doing in terms of expressing the characters' emotions, and then what the voice actors are doing. Since the voice actors can't do any of their work in the subtleties of their facial expressions, what they have to rely on is that the animators will do their part in matching what they recorded with their lines to what they actually see in the movie. And as we all know, that worked out very well with characters like Mufasa, Scar, Simba, pretty much everyone in that movie. However, in this one, because the characters have no means of actually physically expressing themselves and relating their emotions in such a way that we humans can attach themselves to, there is absolutely none of that. What this results in is all of the voice actors sounding bored as they're delivering their lines, including James Earl Jones of all people. How the heck do you make James Earl Jones boring in a movie? Out of all the things that this cast and crew could have done, they could have at least made Mufasa compelling and had James Earl Jones be motivated enough to say most of the lines that he had already recorded in the original movie. Heck, they could have even just taken those original files and just copied and pasted them over here. But since they record new lines and their actors are directed in the way they are, James Earl Jones, Donald Glover, Chiwetel Ejiofor, none of them sounded into what they were actually saying. The performances are devoid of life or real energy, and I think it's certainly reflected in how the characters react too, because since none of them are acting in such a way that we can relate to, it's just animals that have their mouths opening up and down. And since the animals are acting in such a way that we can't relate to, they're literally just opening their mouths up, there's nothing there to attach ourselves to. And I think that affected the vocal performances too, because our minds are reading the performances in such a way that it feels uncanny and weird. And then when you have these voices that are coming out of them, there's sort of a clash of tones there, and there's nothing really gelling to where you feel these characters are compelling or interesting in any way. But it's not just those aspects that rob this whole entire movie of emotion either. It's the fact that, Disney practically adapted 95% of the screenplay of the original movie verbatim into this one. But the strange thing is that in the act of literally copying and pasting like 95% of the screenplay verbatim, and then recreating a lot of the same shots with the same storyboarding, art design, and blocking of the characters, they could have easily kept all the same subtleties and amazing moments that the original film had, and then extended it more. But it's weird because this movie is half an hour longer than the original film, and yet has less. A lot of amazing things that we can all remember from the original movie, like, for example, Rafiki teaching his lesson to Simba by whacking him on the head with a stick and then saying, "It doesn't matter, it's in the past." Or for another example, the Be Prepared song, you can pretty much consider it completely gone here. It's been reduced down to one verse that isn't even memorable, and the art design of the scene is just very boring. It doesn't have any life to it. And then a lot of the humor has been stripped from the film as well, the likes of which could be for reasons that Disney doesn't want to offend any kids with more of the adult-oriented jokes from the original. But because of all the choices that Disney made in removing content from the original film, and then padding this new remake out with stuff that is barely rememberable or even compelling at all, is just strange. And I'm not sure what the real impetus behind those decisions were. My guess is that Disney is trying their hardest to make content that is considered to be politically correct or safe for audiences, that in the act of doing so, their films and their shows are becoming so bland because everything that they do is devoid of any real creativity or life, and they're just trying to appease the base levels that they need to in order for families to say that Disney is still making good content for their families, and they don't really have to think about anything they're watching. They just need to throw something on for their kids, and that is pretty much devoid of any real meaty lessons or anything that's going to teach them about real life. There's just nothing here that's really mature, and I don't mean that in the sense that the Lion King needs to be adult-oriented or anything, but at least it respects kids' intelligence. A lot of the amazing messages in this film are completely watered down from the subtle ways that they're delivered in the original film, especially with the scene in which Mufasa appears to Simba in the clouds. Another scene where, again, I wanted to laugh out loud because of how horribly executed it was. Or a lot of the great jokes that were in the original movie have been subbed out for what I call distraction humor, where jokes are weaved into the film in places that they shouldn't be, and they kind of just awkwardly happen because we need to have a joke here. There's no real consistency with the humor, and I never laughed once. And as far as the music goes, too, I mean, that's another instance where I felt like the tones were clashing with one another, because you have the original music of the film, which is amazing. Some of the best stuff that Hans Zimmer has ever done. But in this film, it's arranged in such a way to where it definitely isn't as interesting as it was in the original movie. But again, that could be because the music that we're hearing isn't really matching what we're seeing on screen. A crucial example of this was for the very first actual musical number in the film, I Just Can't Wait to Be King. In the original, animation was used to its utmost best qualities when Simba lunges forward and the song starts with the colors changing and it becoming a lot more abstract and expressionistic. Since this movie is going for a more realistic approach, none of that happens. The musical cues just start, and the animals just basically run around to different spots here and there, and there's nothing really interesting that they do with the characters. They're just running around and jumping. There's nothing particularly interesting about where the characters are positioned in the frame. They don't do anything creative. Like, if they wanted to make a movie that was more serious, they should have realized that the story that we're telling was supposed to be made to be an expressionistic and fun animated film, not one that is trying to go for a more serious tone. If they wanted to do that, they should have gone the approach of something like Cinderella, which doesn't have any of the musical sequences of the original movie. The creators of that movie knew that they were trying to tell a more dramatic version of the story, and so they cut out the music, they changed the screenplay around, and they actually told a story that felt different from the original. But here's the thing. People love The Lion King so much that a lot of the sequences and the specific shots and the music are so ingrained into their memory, like that, myself included, that to change so many big things about the story and to tell a new version of The Lion King that is drastically different than the original could potentially be risky. They could run into another situation like they did with The Last Jedi, where they told a story that was definitely different than Star Wars fans were used to, and a lot of them just reacted in such a way that they thought it was one of the worst movies they'd ever seen. So the same thing could have happened with this one, where if they removed all the music and told a completely different story than what the original told, people obviously would have gone online and expressed their hatred and said that Disney butchered the original. In trying to recreate the same movie from a different art style into a new one that completely clashes with the idea of something that's more fun, creative, and has animals that can express the way that humans do, just does not work. And I don't mean to say that this movie doesn't work at all. I mean, the animation that they do use for this movie is stunning, I will admit that. The work that these animators did in creating realistic animals and all the grass and the landscape features and the lighting of the sky and everything is definitely breathtaking, and I think it could potentially be used in great ways for future films. And I gotta say that out of all the actors who definitely seemed like they were enjoying being in this movie were probably Seth Rogen as Pumbaa in addition to Billy Eichner as Timon. The effectiveness of their characters being in the movie is debatable, but I can't deny that those actors actually felt like they were having fun portraying those characters, especially in the scene where they were recreating The Lion Sleeps Tonight, which was a lot of fun. But in the end, I see this movie this way. It is basically one of those cringe fest talking dog or cats movies from like the 2000s, just with a bigger budget. I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody by saying this, but when you look at the way that the characters speak and act in this movie, that's pretty much what it looks like. And since the story is devoid of any subtlety or emotion, and the music just clashes with the tone of the movie, and nothing really feels as if it has the same emotion and feel and epicness of the original, I mean, what's the point of really watching this? If Disney wanted to make a good, realistic version of The Lion King, they should have taken notes from two movies. One, Rango, and another one of their productions, Dinosaur. For my first example, Rango is probably the best example of a film that works with a photorealistic animation style, because despite the fact that pretty much everything in that movie looks like it's stripped from reality and put into something of more of a surreal CG animation style, it still works because the characters, while they look very close and similar to how real life animals would look like, there is enough being done with the facial animations and the eyes and the way that the characters interact to where it works. The reality is heightened enough to where you can actually feel like you believe these characters are actually emoting like humans, and it doesn't really feel weird. And despite the fact that my second example, Dinosaur, isn't really that good of a movie in and of itself, that came out 19 years ago. And yet you look at that now, and the animation style that they were going for, which is definitely the same kind of thing that they were doing with The Lion King, and somehow this really old movie at this point has better, more emotive animals than The Lion King in 2019 does. And when you're trying to recreate a movie as iconic and memorable as the original Lion King, you better focus your animation in such a way to where people can actually relate to the animals. I have no idea who made the creative decisions with this movie. I'm not going to try to name any names here because that would be offensive, and I don't really want to try to point out anyone specifically. But this production was failed from the start. Back in 2017, when Beauty and the Beast came out, I made a list of the top 5 movies that Disney should not remake. And this movie was number 1 on that list, especially because I already knew it was in production. Because I have seen so many animated films and I'm such a die-hard fan of the genre, I know that when you have to go for a certain animation style, you better believe that the animators and the directors and everyone involved in the creative team need to do something to make sure that the characters that they're portraying on screen are going to match the tone of what they're going for. If your audience does not connect with these unrealistic characters in any way, or they feel that the tones don't match and it just feels weird, your movie is not going to work. And despite the fact that The Lion King was undeniably made well with some good production value behind it, fundamentally the things that a movie needs, such as a good story, good vocal performances, or particularly for animation, and then visuals that are interesting and full of life, there's none of that here. And so because of that, I think the Lion King remake is an absolute failure. That's just my opinion. People will disagree with me. I know they will, because this is definitely a very controversial topic. But I have to be honest, and I think that if Disney is going to continue remaking their classic animated movies, they need to have a better creative team to where they can figure out how to make live action styles work in appropriating stories that were specifically made to be animated in a traditional cell style. With that, I'm going to give the Lion King remake a D. Thank you so much for watching this review, guys. I know I sounded a bit more angry than I normally do in my reviews, but the original film is something I'm passionate about, and I'm also particularly passionate about this particular topic of the live-action remakes that Disney has been doing, and so I had to be honest about how I feel. Let me know in the comments if you disagree with me, and to call me out if I said anything that I probably shouldn't have. Otherwise, if you do appreciate my content, please like and subscribe. It really does help me grow my content. And check out my Facebook, Letterboxd, and Instagram pages below as well. For those, pages will show you content that you normally wouldn't find here. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good one.